I'm thrilled to announce that this March, in honor of International Women's Day, we will be featuring a series of episodes showcasing inspiring female leaders in design. Each episode will highlight the journeys, achievements, and insights into these remarkable women who are not only shaping the future of design but also paving the way for the next generation of female leaders. Join us as we celebrate their contributions, explore their perspectives, and share their stories of success, resilience, and innovation. So stay tuned and subscribe to Notes of Design to catch these special episodes throughout March. Let's come together to honor and uplift the voices of women in design as we continue to inspire and empower each other in our creative endeavors. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Notes of Design. To help support our mission spread knowledge, we have a very special guest in today's episode. Let's welcome Ruki Neuhold-Ravikumar with over 2 decades of experience in arts, design, culture, education and non-profit sectors. Ruki brings a unique perspective and passion for reimagining future of creative learning and practice. Ruki is a proven administrator, award-winning designer and educator, and globally respected thought leader. Ruki had served as a president and CEO of Kansas City Art Institute, acting director of Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum in New York, and the acting undersecretary of education at Smithsonian Institution at large in Washington, D.C. Ruki has served in multiple leadership roles for American Institute of Graphic Arts, and in 2015, she was named an AIGA Fellow by Oklahoma chapter for advocacy and leadership as a design educator. She is featured in films, podcasts, and interviews, and has won numerous awards and recognitions, including the 2021 Design Achievement Award from the Iowa State College of Design, and was the commencement speaker at Iowa State University's Fall 2023 ceremony. In this episode, Design as a Life Skill, we delve into how Ruki's background in design has shaped her approach to leadership, problem solving, and societal development. We also discuss the importance of teaching design as a life skill, the role of design in addressing complex social issues, and how design thinking can prepare future generations for challenges and opportunities ahead. Additionally, Ruki had also shared her insights on the evolution of design thinking with AI and how design can contribute to sustainability and environmental consciousness. In the end, we concluded the show by Ruki's book recommendations and also people who inspired her in this space. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Notes of Design. In this episode, we have a very special guest with us. Hi Ruki, welcome to Notes of Design.
Thanks so much.
So how was your day, Ruki?
Pretty busy. How about yours?
Quite heavy, it's been raining since last 2 days here, so weather is quite unpredictable here. So yeah. If you could give a brief about yourself to our listeners out there.
Brief about myself. Well, I've had a fairly, I'd say, beautiful and unusual life. I grew up in India, and I immigrated to the United States. I'm based in Kansas City, which is in the Midwest in the United States. I'm the child of very creative parents. I have a younger brother who's also very creative, and I had the privilege of coming abroad to the United States for graduate education in design, and it's where I really got to fall in love with design and learn a lot about it. And from there, I built a career in design, which I think took me down a path that I think I never got to imagine. It opened new pathways that I had no idea were available. And so I have gotten to be an award-winning designer. I've gotten to be a professor of design. I've worked for the Smithsonian Institution in many different roles. I've been in many leadership positions for institutions. And that's about me in a nutshell. I think that's what brings me to your podcast.
That's wonderful, Ruki. So what was your journey into design? How did you start? And what are your tips to the beginners on starting the design journey?
I think growing up in India, not many people really talked about design. A lot of people talked about art. We have a very rich culture of art in India. I grew up, again, as I said, with very creative parents. My dad is a naval architect and my mother is an artist. So I grew up with a lot of exposure to art. I grew up drawing, I grew up painting, and I was that kid in high school that was called the creative one. So I took part in a lot of competitions and drew a lot. And so, but I think when it came to choosing a profession, I was often veered away from choosing art as a career pathway because it's not seen as something that's very lucrative. And we're often told to just do it on the side. And it's something that you can always, do as a hobby. And I think that was the advice that I was given as well. But I did feel like I was good at it. And it's something that I would be very successful at. And I was pretty stubborn about pursuing it professionally. So I majored in it as an undergraduate student. I went to Stella Maris College in India, which is in Chennai. And I was fairly stubborn about pursuing it. So there were a few arguments in my rebellious, I'd say, young life about wanting to seek out opportunities in art to see what was possible. And there were not lots. So the word design was really not in my vocabulary at that time. It was still very much art. But as I started to think about it more seriously, I pursued a degree called graphic design to study abroad. And that, I'd say, is where I really started to become more aware of design. And I started to understand the difference between art and design. And I think that clarity became more clear as I studied graphic design. And so I credit my education at Iowa State for really helping me fall in love with design, understanding design, and creating that pathway into design for me. Say that my education in design comes primarily from my beginning at Iowa State. The education was very different from my education in India. I think here there's a lot more emphasis on being a self-motivated learner. Graduate education here, they really ask you about what do you want to learn, what questions do you want to chase, and that was not my experience in India at all. And I had not thought about those kinds of questions. So it was very intimidating to come into a setting where you had to think about what did you want to study, what questions you wanted to ask. But it was also very freeing. And there was also not many places you could hide. So I really got to think a lot about what did I really want to do and what did I love about design. And I think what I love most about design is solving problems for people. And that has remained, I think, the through line for me throughout my career is that I get to put people at the center of all the problems I solve, whether it's in graphic design, which is my area of practice, or leadership in the roles that I've had, or education as a teacher. You really get to put people in the middle and you get to see what is it that they need and how can I, as a problem solver, figure out how do I solve those problems most creatively for them. And that's where I think as a designer, you start to think about how do you apply your creativity towards the most complex problem. And I've learned that that's really what design is about. And so my career pathway took me from being a graphic designer, where I focused a lot on print very early on, to visual communication, information graphics, to now my practice has evolved into systems and service design, because today's problems are getting more and more complex as people are getting more and more complex in today's world. I think my practice has gotten more complex. And as I decided to stay in the United States, I started teaching. I taught for many, many years. I went up the ladder in teaching. So I became a professor, an associate dean, and so up the academic ladder. And then I switched to a museum sector. So that's how I joined the Smithsonian Institution, and then took on some leadership roles as well. So I had many opportunities to have leadership roles at the Smithsonian, and then most recently got to be the president of an art and design college as well. But throughout, I would say that design has been very critical in taking even the most complex problems and helping me take them apart and having the confidence to take on really any role and tackle it. Because, I don't have a lot of business training or really any other training. I approach every role with my art and design training, and I've actually been extremely successful and creative.
Thank you so much, Ruki, for sharing such an inspirational journey. So, what are your tips for the beginners on starting their design journey?
I think a lot of people think that it's the tools of the trade that they need to learn. And so I find that a lot of beginners get carried away with wanting to learn the software. And they spend a lot of time with taking the software classes. But what I would say is that it's really about the concepts and the ideas that are important. And that's what I learned when I came here, that's the part that you have to kind of spend time helping your brain develop, because the tools actually get updated quite quickly. When I started my career, what tools were in place, those don't exist anymore. And what tools we're working with now are completely different and very exciting. So the tools will change quite rapidly. And I think if you are a curious person, you'll just pick them up. But it's the helping your brain make connections and developing new ideas and being curious. A real creative brain actually makes connections where those connections didn't exist before. So I think, reading more and opening your mind to a breadth of topics and having new kinds of input, that's important so that you actually have a way of connecting things and having new stimuli. Because as a creative person, if you don't have a wide set of stimuli to pull from, then you don't have any, you don't have any new ideas to generate, right? You're going to keep drawing the same things over and over and over again. Like recently, it was pointed out to me that whenever you pull out a book on innovation, almost all those books have a light bulb on the cover. Why is that? Like, when did the light bulb become synonymous with innovation, and why? And that's not really so creative, is it? So if we are going to be creative people, we really need to start thinking of new ways to start to come up with new ideas, right? And I'm going to challenge now all the creative people out there is, if you're going to come up with a new visual for innovation, and I tell you it can't be a light bulb, what will you draw? And it's got to be something other people will recognize as innovative. And so that's going to be a difficult challenge. So you're going to need to really open your eyes to new things in the world. So getting caught up in software, I would say, is probably the last thing you want to do. And meeting people, opening your eyes, taking in the world with all of your senses. The everyday is actually quite extraordinary. Sketching more, talking to people, reading more. I think those are the things that actually make you a pretty amazing creative person.
Thank you so much, Ruki, for those wonderful recommendations. So let's begin our episode today with design as a life skill. So how did you begin to see design not just as a professional practice, but as a compass for life? Could you share some examples of how to apply these design principles in everyday decision making?
Yeah, most of the great designers I've met are people who've actually came to design pretty late in their lives, and they were resourceful people first. And I found that they're all people who, like me, were people who sort of took things apart and didn't put them back together, or were just genuinely curious people. And these are people who, they're tinkerers, they're problem solvers, and they use that design process no matter where they are. And so I think once you have that design mindset and you have that approach of, asking why often, and you are not afraid to just try things, test things, and if it doesn't work, you're okay with going back to the drawing board and trying it again. And for you, if something doesn't work, you sort of look at it as constantly as an idea in development. And sometimes you look at it as, if it didn't work here, it'll work for something else. Then you kind of have that design mindset to begin with. And I think whenever I get a really big problem, my first approach is not to look at it in its biggest state, but to take it apart and to try and make it more manageable. And I do that for most things in my life. And I find that I approach leadership that way. I approach everyday problems that way. Even when I went to graduate school, it wasn't easy. I was a kid from India in Ames, Iowa, from Chennai. It was super hot. And then I went to Ames and it was so cold. I'd never experienced winter, never seen snow in my life. Everything was opposite. But I think just being a designer, you learn to figure things out. And it's that just being resourceful on how do you use your limited resources and make them go as far as possible. That itself, I would say, is a designer mindset. And there's so many people, I'd say, who I met in India who don't think of themselves as designers. But I think if you start to see it this way, you actually are. Like the number of people who just solve very quick problems so quickly, who put, tennis balls at the bottom of walkers so that they don't slip. That's a design problem. Like you've solved it really quickly, right? I've seen like in India, there's so many people who are so resourceful. They recycle and reuse objects over and over and over again in such interesting ways. And I think that to me is like design thinking 101. And that's why I think that I'm surprised it hasn't been a part of our vocabulary, and it should be, because it is all around us all the time. So I am kind of surprised that it was introduced to me so late, and I wish it were introduced to me earlier, because once it was, it felt like I'd been thinking about it my whole life. So I've answered it in a really roundabout way, but I feel like I was solving these problems from the time I was a kid. So, I tend to, like in the design process, we have, in general, it's asking the question, defining the problem, right, is the first part of design. In any good design methodology, it's defining that problem. And most often I find that people accept a challenge the way it's been presented to them. And I find that that was the most valuable thing I learned about design, is to make sure that I'm dealing with the right problem to begin with. And I think that has served me well through design training. And once you realized that you actually, you make sure that you actually have the right problem to begin with. Because if you, there's a quote here that they say, if you've identified your problem to be a nail, then all your solutions will look like a hammer. And so make sure that your problem is in fact a nail. Otherwise, you're going to run around and constantly be looking for a hammer, right? But what happens if your problem is actually a screw? Then you've got the wrong tool in your hand and it's not useful anymore. So make sure that you're asking the right questions. And that's where, for me, like design has been such a useful, just the whole process has been really useful. I'd also say that oftentimes we talk about design as a noun, and where I think I'm talking to you about it is design as a verb, where when designers talk about it, we often talk about the process of design. So asking the question, really thinking through the idea and sketching it out and making sure that you've thought about multiple solutions, sometimes building it up and making sure that you are trying multiple things and not being stuck with just one idea. And we often live in a society where people get comfortable with one idea as the idea, and things are very precious. And I think that sometimes limits us in our thinking. And if we get tight, because when we take tests in schools, there's only like one right answer, right? And so we get attached to that concept very quickly, but design makes you break away from that thinking of that one right answer and opens you back up to the idea that there are multiple ways in which you can tackle a problem. And if something doesn't work, it's okay. You can come back and rework it. So I think all of those concepts are how I think I've applied things in my life as a person, as a leader, and as a teacher. And I think that's really how it's been helpful to me.
Thank you, Ruki. So now let's talk in terms of leadership lens. So as in leadership roles, how did your background in design influence your approach to leadership and problem solving in those positions?
So leadership is, I think, one of the ways in which I've never accepted a problem. When someone says, like, we have a very particular problem. So for me, like higher education, oftentimes the most common higher education problem is they'll tell you that your university has a parking problem, like that your school campus does not have enough parking spaces, right? So, but oftentimes the problem is that people want to park as close as possible to their classroom, or so the problem is often not that the number of spaces or that there's actual parking problem, but it's often the problem is that there's a laziness problem, is that people want to be as close as possible to their building. So when you actually do the research, it seems like there actually are enough spaces. They're just not very close to where people want to be. And so it's a perception problem. It's not actually a parking problem. So once you redefine the problem, you realize that people actually want to be close. It's not that there's an issue. So you kind of have to reframe the problem. And that's where the leadership part comes in. You start to help people see that actually walking a few more steps is actually good for them, as opposed to walking, like being right next to their building, or or if they want to be right next to their building, then they just need to come a little bit earlier if that's what they want to aim for. But once you educate them, they realize that it wasn't a parking problem. So sometimes just challenging the thinking around the problem and not accepting it as it was presented to you is very helpful. If you accept the problem as it was presented to you, sometimes leaders chase the wrong solution, and you can be chasing a really expensive solution because you just assumed that was the right problem. And this happens often. Like people build really expensive parking structures or things like that because they just assumed that was the problem. And this happens a lot. So most leaders have to spend a lot of time actually making sure that they, in fact, have the right problem. And that sometimes it's not what people want to hear, right? They want to make sure that when I tell you that, okay, like this is the problem, then you want the leader to say, okay, and agree with you. I think that problem component of it is really where I have benefited the most from the design thinking process, and where I've spent the most time is in asking why. I think I'm not as opposed to the fact that there are multiple ways to get to it and there's no one right answer. And the idea that a good idea can come from anywhere in the organization. So the fact that just only someone with a director title or a VP is capable of coming up with a big idea. So when you, I think, have that sense of everybody can sit together and prototype an idea, I think it sort of flattens the hierarchy a little more. It opens it up to, I think, much more innovative ways of working. So I think as a leader, I'm much more of a creative leader. And I think design has helped me approach leadership much more with putting people at the center of everything.
Thank you so much, Ruki. What approach do you suggest for teaching design as a life skill to individuals who are not professionally involved in design?
I've been having really interesting conversations with people business leaders and others who are not aware of design. I often see creativity is often listed as the most sought after skill set in every business and in every industry. You can talk to any CEO of any business, any industry, and they will tell you that creativity is the most sought after skill set. So why aren't they hiring more designers is my question. Why aren't they requiring more people in their companies to take design classes? Why aren't they offering professional development and design? This is my question. I think this is my question for those who are professionally, who haven't had it. I think it's a necessity as we move forward. If people really want to be innovative, they do need to tool up. They do need to invest in their future education in creativity. It's not something that just comes to you overnight. You do have to condition your brain to think that way. And it's something that creative professionals spend a lot of time conditioning their brain to do that. While you can, I think what has happened is that people think that this is just God-given talent. And yes, people are artistic and they can draw well and all of that. But to be innovative and creative, that takes training, and that takes a lot of time and commitment to do that every day, all the time. That is a lot of stress on your brain. It's like for people who are not professionals, they have to go for a run or take a shower. It's because you have to get your brain in a certain condition for that to happen, right? And what's really happening there is your brain is in a state of diffuse focus. And that's the place where it is connecting things where it did not connect before. But a creative professional, you're asking them to do that during regular hours all the time. And so they have trained to do that. So respect the training that they have gone through in order to be able to do that. And that takes a certain skill where your brain has reached a point where it is able to match those kinds of ideas and tap into a place where it is able to draw and reach a place of diffuse focus. So the brain has different ways of functioning. And I think for people to realize that creativity doesn't happen just all the time, every day, I think I want them to realize that takes some training and to invest in that, but also that everybody is capable of creativity, but not everyone will be a creative professional, and that there's a difference between that. Just like how we all maybe like to sing, but we will all not be professional singers. It's just like that. So I think that's where I'm spending a lot of time these days, especially at this point in my career, to educate more people that there are creative professionals and it comes with practice, and you do have to practice being creative. Those are not things that just like come on a whim. And so I think that's what I want more creatives to also do, is to spend more time educating their friends, their family members, their colleagues about what it takes to come up with a creative idea that sometimes I think people get mesmerized by designed objects, the noun, right? When they see good design, people are only aware of design when it's perfect or imperfect. When it works seamlessly, no one talks about design because it's working beautifully. They are aware of design when it doesn't work well. Like when the chair is uncomfortable, they will tell you about who designed this bad chair. Or when an interface does not work well, they are aware of design. But I think they should become more and more aware of how much of design is in our world. We are sitting on design, we are touching design. Everything that we interact with in our lives is because a designer has handled it and made deliberate choices. And that's why your world is better. And people should be more aware of it. I think that's what I want non-designers to be aware of.
Thank you so much, Ruki. So, how do you think design influences societal development, and what role does it play in addressing complex societal issues?
I think it's a great question that you're asking about how does design influence societal development and complex social issues. I think about this all the time. So one of the exhibitions I worked on at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, actually several of the exhibitions were about complex social issues. And one of the last exhibitions that I had the privilege of working with was about designing solutions for peace. And I think we know that in today's world, almost every country has conflict. And so I think when we think about how do we solve for peace, I think that is a complex social issue. As we design more and more weapons, we're also thinking about how do we design more peaceful environments for us to live in, right? I think this is a complex social issue. And I think this is where I think about as a leader, it is very difficult to solve problems in their most complex state. In a business setting or a social setting, in its most complex state, it is overwhelming. So I think what anybody does or can do to manage change is to take it apart and take it down to its simplest state. We're struggling with even things like how do we get clean water to some communities? What we find is that the easiest way is not to try to tackle it as a global problem, but really try to tackle it at a local level, right? So instead of trying to tackle how do we get clean water to the whole world, it's really about like community by community, and then try to get it to everybody. And so once you start to tackle problems on a smaller scale and you find one solution that works, then you can start to look at how do you scale the solution that did work. So I think that's where the design is helpful, is it helps you take apart things, scale it, test it, and then put it back together and see how you can work it in a much larger scale. That's where I find it to be manageable, both in my life, where sometimes when you have an overwhelming situation, instead of trying to get overwhelmed by how do I tackle this really big problem, it's just handle it one day at a time, one step at a time, instead of trying to look at how will I do this for the rest of my life? It's much harder. Instead of that, you just say, what am I going to do the next minute? And that's much easier than trying to say, what will I do for the next 10 years? Well, that's much harder. But a minute I can handle a minute. And then you realize, okay, I took a minute. Now let me take the next hour. And then it's easier and easier as you tackle it through. So that's where I find design has helped me make change more manageable.
Thank you, Roki. So considering the rapid evolution of our world, what role do you think design should play in shaping the mindset and skills of future generations? How can design be used to prepare them for challenges and opportunities of the future?
I think design can help all of us become better managers of change. I think, we're all in today's world, I think there are people who I'm a huge proponent, not only as a teacher, but as a designer. Learning is a huge core value for me. And I think from the moment we're born, we learn. And for me, like the second you stop learning, you die. And so I'm constantly learning and I enjoy learning. And to me, I think the part I love about design is the questioning part, the asking the important questions. And so I think that's where in this rapidly evolving world, it's the what questions are we going to ask, right? And that's going to push what solutions will follow. So this goes back to if we don't ask important questions and we don't keep challenging that, then we'll just be happy with the fact that if someone says the problem is a nail, all of us are going to run out and go get hammers, then that might be a problem moving forward. But we should question, is it really the nail that's the problem? And I think that's where, as a future generation, I think design can be helpful in challenging the question, help us manage that change more effectively. And I think in today's world also there's a lot of fear. Because there's so much conflict globally, there's a lot of fear. But I think what I have learned from my life in making change more manageable is there's a big difference between fear and embarrassment. And people confuse the two. Then embarrassment you can manage. And growing up in India, I found that embarrassment was always like, what will people say? That you can control. And really, real people living real lives are not thinking about you, actually. They're just doing their own thing, living their own lives. So that you can actually completely control. And then you realize there's actually not a lot that you're afraid of. When you start to see that difference between fear and embarrassment, then change management becomes more powerful. And so I think in this part of my career, I'm starting to look at how do I go from being designer to educator to change manager using design, again, as my compass. And so I would, again, invite maybe the next generation to see themselves as change leaders, change managers in shaping their mindset.
Thank you so much, Ruki. So how can design as a life skill contribute to sustainability and environmental consciousness in general life?
I think it goes back to that. It's we live in this immense world, and I think sometimes we think of ourselves as the world stops behind us when I think I was telling you earlier that I've had the privilege of living a beautiful and unusual life. And part of that beautiful, unusual life is more recently I have, gotten to see more of the natural world. I have taken more time to engage with nature. And I don't know if it's just, some people say the older you get, you suddenly become more aware of like birds and trees and things like that. And maybe I'm just in that part of my life where suddenly I'm noticing more nature, but you realize just how immense this world is and that you are actually such a small part of the world that you are not that important at the end of the day. And that's where, as you think about how small you are in the immenseness of the world, then you start to think about how can you use your time to really make a difference? And, in that immenseness, how can you use design to make a contribution and continue to keep that beautiful world sustainable? And when you see just how beautiful and intricate it is, you want that to be preserve it, right? So when you see like sea turtles nesting and you see some of that, it is truly, you see like the design, the intricate design of nature itself. And it is far more intelligent and far more complex than anything we have ever made, that you suddenly realize like we have so much to learn. And you want to study some of that even more and ask those questions and understand those systems deeper, that you really do want those to last forever. That I think that's why you want in some ways preserve those to last a lifetime. I think that's where you want to manage the change that's happening right now to not happen as rapidly as it's happening. And I think that's where we do need to think about, what are we doing? Like the world does not need one more like water bottle. Why are we making what we're making? So as we make things, why are we making it? Are we making more solutions or are we making problems? And that's where the question part of the design process is so critical.
Thank you so much, Ruki. So feedback is a big part of design. So what's your take on how to give feedback and how to receive feedback and implement in life?
Feedback is such a critical part. And I think that's where I think I love that as it's something we don't learn in the early education process, but I think it's something that we should learn as a community on how, and conversation, part of communication and conversation is give and take, right? Is as we communicate, it's I give you a thought and you give me a response, and that is also feedback. And we've come to associate somehow feedback as negative and criticism as negative. And I think as we start to associate feedback also as positive, that I think will start to become better received. And I think that's where, as a teacher, I would help people see that feedback is nothing but communication between two peers, that you're just helping someone's idea get better, that it is simply just a communication process between two peers who respect each other. And so I think that's where there's often fear in the design processes. We call that critique in the design process. It's a dreaded part of the design process in many design schools. People don't want to put their work up and don't want to get feedback because they think that their very precious idea will get attacked. And I think in social media today, it's also sometimes a scary place because people put out a lot of negative comments with a lot of anonymity. And I think that's not fair either.
Thank you, Ruki. So how do you envision the evolution of design thinking with AI in the upcoming future?
I think right now there's a little bit of excitement and a little bit of skepticism around AI. I personally think this could be a great time for creatives around AI because, part of it is AI is going to use existing content. And so this is a great time for creatives to add to that body of content. It kind of reminds me around the time when Photoshop first came out and everybody wanted to use Photoshop. And it kind of separated the amateurs from the pros. And I think that's what's going to happen. With any new tool, I think there will always be the people who want to play with it. And I think that's what's happening right now. There are lots of people playing with it, and a few people will misuse it. Few people will do some things extraordinary with it, but that will be like one in a million, maybe. But ultimately, the people who are professionals are going to be the ones who really push the boundaries of what's possible with it. So, I'm really excited to see what the creative professionals do with it, because ultimately they will, I think, add new content and really start to push the boundaries of what's possible with AI. And so I'm excited to see what the creative community starts to do with AI. So I'm ready for the next chapter. We've been talking about AI since the early 2000s. So this is not new for me. I think this is now at a point where we are just starting to see it in the hands of maybe the average consumer. And so I think this is why it's all the rage right now. But we've been talking about AI for a very, very long time.
Thank you, Ruki, for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. So could you please share with us how does your day look like, and what advice would you offer to young designers or individuals keen on integrating design thinking into their careers and everyday lives?
My day looks, it's all over the place, but I'm not a morning person. So usually I spend a lot of time. I think I like to start my day typically with a lot of input. I like a quiet morning, and I usually spend a lot of time reading and taking a lot of input in, because I like to get my brain thinking and ruminating. But I think everybody has their different moments of when the creative spark goes. I like to not do a lot of emails in the morning, but I'm a pretty I'm at this point I'm pretty structured with and disciplined about how I like to, I think, manage my brain function. And so I would start to, I think, suggest to especially creative professionals to start to, I think, respect how your brain functions and start to get your brain trained. And it is the thing that you need to manage and respect and take care of all of your senses, because I think like people like take care of their eyes, they take care of everything else, but that brain for a creative is what's going to help you generate those ideas. So what you put in your head and how you help it make connections is really, really important. So managing your sleep, your exercise, your talking to people, your stress, all of that is also really, really important for a creative.
So what advice would you offer to young designers or individuals keen on integrating design thinking into their careers and everyday lives?
Thank you for that question. I would say talk to people who are designers, talk to people who are creatives, but also talk to people who are not. And I would say engage with the world with all of your senses. Live life, have a story to tell. Design is also about storytelling. So start to actually pay attention to what's going on. And a big part of, I think, storytelling is actually trying to make those great connections. So I think having life experiences is a big part of that. Having fun, actually engaging with nature or whatever it is, but not doing the same repetitive action is so important for any creative professional or anyone who wants to be even slightly innovative, because that's the only way you get to figure out how to connect things that didn't connect before, because you need new stimuli. So you've got to give yourself a chance to see new things, touch new things, feel new things. So you've got to get out of the rut of doing the same thing over and over again. So challenge yourself to have new experiences. And if you are in the same routine, then meet new people or read new things, eat new things, do something different so that your life has new experiences.
Thank you so much, Ruki, for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. So we'll conclude the show by your 3 favorite book recommendations and also people who inspire you the most in this space.
I think most recently I have just finished An Immense World. It's the whole book is An Immense World, How Animal Senses Reveal the Hidden Realms Around Us. It's not a new book. It's actually a 2022 book by Ed Young. I highly, highly recommend it. because I think it really talks about just how immense this world is and how many just, it talks a bit about how we have five senses, but animals have so many more, and how we're kind of disrupting this world. Eels have, use electric senses and sonar and all of these other things going on. So I'm kind of now just more aware of how much bigger this world is and how much smaller we are. And um, I would also make a plug for Dory Tunstall's Decolonizing Design, a cultural justice guidebook. Dory has worked very hard on this book, and I think as people, there are not a lot of books about design from countries like India, and there's a lot of books about design from the West. And so people like Dory are really talking about decolonizing design. So I would highly recommend the work that she's doing. But then there are lots of new design podcasts, and yours is one of them. But besides that, there's Doug Powell has done a new podcast on design, is a prototype. And I'm season 1, episode 1. So I would make a shameless plug for that as well.
Thank you so much, Ruki. So, who are the people who inspire you the most in this space?
A lot of great people. I know that I follow Scott Belsky's work. He writes a lot of books, really practical advice. I respect his work and advice, and he writes a lot on LinkedIn as well and other mediums, really sound advice. And he's with Adobe. John Maeda is another real strong thinker and doing a lot with AI these days. And he's with Microsoft. So I follow John Maeda's work, but besides that, huge fan of what Dory Tunstall is doing. And so these are the people that I follow and have followed for a while.
Thank you so much, Ruki, for all these wonderful recommendations. And thank you so much for your time. We are looking forward to host you again in our upcoming episodes.
Oh, thank you so much for the invitation. This was such a fun conversation. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to feedback from your listeners.